Yeah. Okay, well, my background is in kind of land promotion, and one of the first things I get asked by landowners and their agents is kind of what's the land value, what's the project going to be worth, and kind of at its simplest, the kind of basic residual method is the starting point to derive the kind of value of the development site, where the gross development value minus the cost of creating it plus the profit equals a residual land value. I think the problem with this approach and method is that the land value is determined by the gross development value, which is driven by fitting the most revenue generating floor space on the site, selling or leasing it at the highest price, and building at the lowest cost to provide the greatest return for the kind of landowner or shareholders. And I feel that this approach ignores an essential part of the value chain. And so what if another metric could be measured and included in GDV? A lot of the social value of a development is created in the public spaces between the buildings and the activities happening in and around the site. The value and importance of a well-designed and flexible public space has only increased through lockdown, where kind of convening outdoors in parks, squares, plazas, and streets around our homes becoming an ever increasing part of our social life. However, creating these public spaces sits firmly within the cost column, but the value and benefit created is not easily accounted for in the GDV or appraisal process. This is either because it's intangible, it's difficult to quantify, or sometimes not recognised until much later in the project cycle. Sadly, kind of under current planning policy, it's possible that a lot of the kind of social value proposed early on, or the affordable tenures, they get kind of negotiated or kind of watered down or removed through planning viability and 106 negotiations, which creates distrust of developers from local communities. And despite some of the kind of more controversial aspects of the planning white paper, I hope one of these reforms will be kind of the development levy to create certainty for developers and council and community, but also speed up delivery. So how can we better quantify the potential social value of the public and community spaces between spaces within the scheme, so that it forms a greater part of the appraisal process, making social value created through these spaces the starting point, then being the bits left around the edges? So I feel that a kind of a simple toolkit is needed to help all developers, communities and councils to appraise and measure the social value created through the land uses and public spaces of a proposed scheme. We've seen the introduction of the biodiversity net gain calculator to support that policy. Could something similar be created to measure the social value of development schemes? There are a number of existing tools and ideas out there already, but often these are complex and they require trained professionals, lots of data and measurements, and they sometimes mean little to the end consumer, the residents, unless you're, say, UBS designing a new headquarters. And there's also developers out there and consultants using their own bespoke tools and methods. I think we need to simplify the process and the language used, so that there is one simple appraisal framework toolkit that can be understood and used by all stakeholders. So what could this appraisal toolkit look like? What is it going to measure? I've really thrown everything up there. I think there's the obvious ones, which are kind of health, well-being, habitat and biodiversity. But I also think things like how adaptable is the land use, how flexible and multi-purpose, how can it react to changes? Also the purpose, with greater pressure on land use, does it have a purpose? Can it also have another function? I can particularly say planting being used as drainage, that kind of thing. And also management and governance. Is there agency for the community control and shape what happens on the site and how it's run, and is it self-sustaining, and kind of really trying to measure the things that matter. So how and when to use this this toolkit? I think the first of 7 social value principles is to involve stakeholders, and that's anyone involved, anyone affected by your activities. And this is primarily the local community and the council. And so this is the kind of starting with the consultation phase. And the starting point is to quantify who and what is already there, the residents, the current land use, local demographics, and what is unique to the character of that site, the area, and any issues and constraints. And this will determine a baseline measurement and current social value score. And then through the consultation process, scoring can be made against each of the land use metrics, and weighting given to the areas that matter most to that community, and help steer proposals that deliver social value. And this will set the target for the developer. I don't know why I put a picture of the cake out there. I think it's slightly influenced by Bake Off being back on TV. But it's also, as a reminder, that the purpose of the social value toolkit is to lay out the ingredients for the consultation to influence what gets cooked, instead of the developer arriving with a kind of partly baked cake and asking the community what colour icing they'd like. So what would the output look like? What could this look like in practice? I think I'm led to, it could look like a kind of energy performance certificate. Could we have some form of social value certificate for our public spaces and realm? This way, it's a simple visual way for everyone to understand the quality of the space being created, with the social value score agreed for the current use, the potential use, and then the actual use once the site is the scheme is delivered. And then the social value target can be agreed between the developer, the community, a council ahead of planning. And then this means the developer has a clear target to work towards, which will result in their social value certificate. And this can be an ongoing measurement tool throughout the project cycle. So far, this sounds like more cost and hassle for kind of the developer. Why would they use it? I think it's another way of creating transparency and accountability in creating social value. And how does the kind of social value, how does this actually get incorporated back into the GDV and appraisal process? What do these social value points mean? Well, Bruce taught us one thing, that points mean prizes. I guess there's an enhancement to the values of the other uses across the scheme, the well-designed place. We've seen this with the kind of energy performance certificates. But there's also cost savings through innovative approaches to the land use. I think with the certificates, the developers' schemes scoring highest, there may be benefits of access to MHCLG funding, or whether the kind of developer levy banding. However, those not performing or delivering social value, they could also find themselves with increased levy or potential kind of land value capture. I think it's meant to be a toolkit that puts it in the hands of the developers and their teams to be creative, bold, and brave in the creation of new places, and results in improved social value for those that will live in and around the scheme. And hopefully the scheme wear its social value certificate with pride, and it then keeps the developer and asset managers invested in the ongoing management, governance, uses and community initiatives. So how can this be taken forward? Who can be involved? There are already a lot of developers who are creating great places with real social purpose at the core. These shouldn't be the exception, and I'd like to see that it becomes a standard across all schemes. So is this a kind of open source who are already delivering best practice? Can we work together to define a kind of industry framework? Does policy have a part to play? And kind of a social value statement forming part of the planning application process. They've also got the kind of design guides and potential new placemaking officers in kind of the planning reforms. And also, does it form part of the offer for the kind of public consultation tools such as Give My View in capturing a lot of this data? But finally, is it an evolution for the developer in the Pineapples? Is it an evolution of that they become the Ofsted rating for social value in public placemaking? So, and I appreciate that this has been focused on the public spaces, but the social value goes much further into the tenures built on site, businesses, community users. So I feel that it could also be used for that too. So thank you. I'll wait for my feedback.
Hello. If you want to unshare your screen, I'm going to start to invite your feedback panel. But yeah, thank you very much for the mention of the Pineapples. Definitely didn't think that I could become an Ofsted for places, but this is a fantastic idea. I'm going to invite up Natasha. Brilliant. Natasha McTire Hall, who was trying to come last week and couldn't. So I'm hoping she will appear on stage now to join you for your feedback. And great to have you from Portsmouth. So lovely to have you join us. You were, of course, supposed to be able to come, but we had some technical issues, didn't we, last week? But it's so great to see you here and have you get your feedback.
Yes, I was watching.
Brilliant. I saw you left some good comments in the chat. I'm loving the chat today. Johnny's coming back. I'm bringing Will, who you've seen at the beginning, Will Sandy, and finally Kat Drew. And Natasha, it'd be great to hear from you first in response to Christopher's gross social value.
Great, thank you. Great presentation, thank you very much. And I agree with so much of what you said. I have a little shameless plug right at the beginning. I have a project called Tipner West, which is fairly large, which is moving forward. And we are trying our very best to encourage different ways of thinking about how it could be developed at all times. And one of the things that we're talking about at the moment is how to create different metrics. So, for example, we have waterfront access, but instead of putting big properties up there and cashing in on the value of that, we're stepping all the buildings back and making sure that's accessible to all. Now, we believe that that's going to have tremendous impact on the health and well-being of the people there, but actually, is there a way of measuring that and bringing it back to say this will have a significant impact on the NHS? For example, so there's all sorts of different ways that I think those metrics are really important, and I think it's kind of fundamental to everything we do, because again, everything that you say is correct. Sites are set up for profit, and the problem that I have as a property developer is getting any cost consultants or developers to take seriously an uplift in value as a result of a good place. But I think a lot of what you talked about, we try and do, but where we're kind of hamstrung is around the fact that we still have to release that value. We still have to collaborate. So for me, what I kept coming back to when you were speaking was whether or not there was an opportunity to have kind of specialist developments that focused on a particular thing that would then allow a planning authority, for example, to be able to focus on that. So if it is a thing that promotes health and well-being as a specialism, as a sort of expert thing, then I feel like that this is something that we could really start to push on without having to take apart the entire sort of capitalist institution. But I really enjoyed your presentation, so thank you. And yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Will, I'm going to jump to you.
Cool. Yeah, my internet's been dropping in and out, but apologies if I go over anything. I guess from a landscape perspective, it's we're always the last in and the first out. So when we're talking about value, it's kind of hard for us to bring anything to the table when, the trees are kind of conceived as this like little bit of green parsley that goes on the main meal. And, I know that's been used quite a lot, but it's really important to create place. And I think I'm going to reiterate my point earlier that we have reevaluated our relationship to what that means. And speaking to developers, I know a lot of their properties aren't selling because they didn't create any gardens. They just tacked on a bit of communal garden. And so it's just become these kind of, I know that places are increasing by a minimum of 20 grand just to have a garden on top of their value. So whether that's the public realm or whatever. And then through this process, we had loads of approaches from different practitioners sort of doing their own value approach or empirical scales. And I think that's fine, but why don't we give those to the community and they evaluate the schemes? And sort of, I've just been seeing a few comments about league tables. If the people are empowered to understand how they start to feed back on schemes, surely we'll start to have a better engagement and a more meaningful kind of thing. And it goes back to the conversation last week about thinking outside the red line. If we keep thinking invertedly, we're never going to create a meaningful gross social value system, which I think is an amazing idea. So thanks, Chris. You're muted. Christine, you're muted, I think.
Right. Oh, that always helps when you push the mute button. You'd think that they really need to automate something like that, but people don't often know when to mute themselves, but always forget to unmute. And Kat, I was going to jump over to you and get your feedback.
Great. Well, thank you, Christopher, so much for that. Again, a really inspiring presentation. So it made me, this and the feedback made me think of a couple of things. So first of all, at Design Council, we do a State of the Nation report into the economic value of design. And this year, we've been working with Mariana Mazzucato's students to understand how we can also measure the social and the environmental impact of design. And some of the challenges have been coming up in the chat about this. And it's we haven't got to an answer. We're still halfway through the project, but there's a tension between coming up with a measure like the pound sign, which is a kind of in the UK universal measure to capture economic impact for kind of well-being and all these other kind of ripple effects of social value. And there's been loads put on the chat, and we could just decide one that everyone uses. But then I think Chris Brown made a really good point that actually value is determined. It's a conversation, and value is subjective, and it needs to be determined by the people living there. And actually, that is part of an engagement process in itself. So there's a tension. I don't have an answer, but something to think about. We're doing a piece of work at the moment with the Greater London Authority around their good growth projects and helping them to create a set of design principles so they can make the link between the construction work and the capital investment and the measures that the mayor cares about, which are around participation and around equality and around relationships. So things that lead to social integration. And so we've been basically co-designing with those projects what are the different tactics about how the space is used, about how the social programming within the space is used, and about how the governance works that kind of makes the link between the project and the property development and the social value that you get out of it. And so I can share that in due course. It's kind of final stages of the report. And the last thing, and so to that point also, it's really important then to think about, and I would say this from Design Council, not just about kind of built environment, but how you work with social entrepreneurs and local business innovation as well. So you're creating an ecosystem of value. And then the final thing, and I'll put it in the chat so everyone can have a look, is we made a really nice film last year about this coastal town in Northumbria called Amble. And it was kind of loads of unemployment, and the town was kind of in disrepair. And the property developer could have just put in some new properties on the seafront, but they decided to go outside the red line and actually create, because when we did community engagement with the community, they said, we don't want necessarily new houses, we want self-employment. We want our own choices. So they created a series of small pods down on the waterfront, which created a whole kind of plethora of community kitchen and craft shops and a surf school. And all of that then contributed to them winning the High Street of the Year award, which then got a load of extra property investment in. So there is a circular effect. And I guess at the moment we measure that through case studies and storytelling.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Johnny, I'm going to bring you in now.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Christine. Thank you, Christopher, for the presentation. It was really thoughtful and raised loads of good points. I think there's quite a lot in it, and I've got a few questions. But firstly, it was sort of say that this really talks to my experience. We're as a developer, we want to do good stuff. There's probably lots of other developers who want to do good stuff as well. And often, I think that we have the sense that the kind of odds are stacked against us when we're bidding for land, because of the residualized valuation sort of approach that's so ingrained in our sort of development culture. And basically, if we want to do anything that's good quality, it's going to put us at a disadvantage relative to another bidder in a process who is assuming that quality isn't necessary. And yet we know that by doing something good, then we're kind of creating some value somewhere. It's just very, very difficult for us to crystallize, because we can't just sell a house for £10 more per square foot because we've done something a little bit better. And actually it would be wrong to anyway, because we've got an affordability crisis. And yet certain things that we do could have a major impact on things that on costs that do or don't arise elsewhere in the process. So for example, if we can build in a way that reduces car use by investing more in public transport, that's probably a cost to us. But it will be a saving somewhere else in the system, like the NHS will benefit from more active lifestyles that are brought about by our development. And so I think it's desperately needed that instead of having this two-way dialogue between a landowner and a developer in this kind of super simplistic way that we see at the moment, that instead you have a holistic view of value, and that we're in some way incentivized or permitted to create value, and it's recognized when we create value in the system, and somehow the land value is adjusted. But again, this is a radical idea, because you're challenging something that's at the heart of our industry, which is the landowner's right to charge the highest amount for their land. And I think we need to all be saying that land is too much money is being spent on land. That money is exiting the system. It's being extracted by landowners who are few in number, and grouped in part of our society that where a lot of wealth is already kind of embedded. And actually, it's right that it needs to be regulated in some better way than it is at the moment. And we need to be spending less on land, which means that we can spend more on other interventions and design quality, which have better outcomes. So I guess where I want to get to with your idea is to ask you how it can be, how will it have teeth? Is it a planning sort of thing, like a kind of certificate? In which case, how is it not what the planning system is already meant to be doing? Is it a sort of kind of badge that a developer can say, oh, we kind of created this social value, aren't we great? In which case you're relying on their kind of feeling about their reputation being their driver. But given that they can sell any old rubbish in the current climate of housing shortage, is it really going to motivate them that much to do things differently? Or is it something that kind of gets at the heart of our valuation mechanisms? In which case, maybe it's something that you need to talk to, to explore with, the MRICS, with the RICS. I don't know if this is a working group or whether there should be, but whether you actually get to grips with the kind of the heart of the matter through our valuation protocols and the Red Book and so on. And I'm particularly interested in land that's owned by the public sector, because it's almost like the public sector land is kind of the worst, because it's obliged to get the best value out of it by law. And yet public sector land should be the first in line to actually show how it can regulate land value a little better, to encourage other outcomes and stuff. So I think it's all really relevant stuff. Land value, I think, is at the heart of everything. We talk about all sorts of other things, but never about land. Never enough about land value and this kind of, problematic mechanism at the centre of every project. But I think that sort it out with the RICS, and I'm sure there are others in this, here today, and I've seen some of the comments. There are people who you should be talking to here as well. Chris Brown is definitely one who was active in the chat earlier on. But yeah, good luck with it, and I hope to hear more.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Johnny. I saw you were getting lots of emojis from the audience there, I think. But I also saw Natasha shaking her head when she said, "Oh, the public sector do it first." So I think she's going to keep you on the hook for.
Good.
But Chris, I'm going to give you the opportunity to come back now. Johnny also just put a question to you, which is, where are the teeth? So do you have some ideas about teeth?
Well, yeah, there's quite a lot to think about and take in. The blunt instrument, I think, is probably in some form of land value capture. Would be a way of incentivizing landowners to think less about kind of making as much money as possible on the land use, and instead sharing some of the wealth with the kind of social uses on the site. But how that happens, I haven't got that far yet in my thinking. So hopefully, with the help of other this and people in the chat room, we might be able to take it forward. But thank you.
Great. Please do connect. You guys might not realize, but in your direct chat, you can actually message somebody else privately, but they have to accept it. So check your direct chats if someone's reaching out to you, but it's a really good way to connect through the system. And then also we are happy to facilitate connecting offline as well. So my email is christine@thedeveloper.live. If you could give a wave to our panel, and actually some of you are not back. Johnny, you've done 2 sessions of this, and this is your last feedback panel, but everyone can catch Johnny at the Festival of Place. Natasha as well is going to be speaking at the Festival of Place. Kat is speaking at the Festival of Place. So do get your passes to that. And we've got our 3rd Radical Rethink. So don't go anywhere, but do wave goodbye to these guys. Thank you so much. Lots of applause. And thank you, Christopher. I think you've really hit something. I mean, there's a lot of people looking at gross social value, but I really like your take on this. I think it was one of the ideas we were really excited about. So